everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Master Instructor Roundtable. I am Wendy Batts here with my colleague and friend, Mr. Marty Miller. Marty, how are you today?
Great, Wendy. Appreciate that. I hope you're doing well.
Oh, always. I'm actually excited about this week. We are live. So if you guys have any questions or comments as Marty and I are talking about the content today, please feel free to put it in the comment box and we'll be sure to get those questions answered. And also thanks for joining us. But this week we are talking about the near and dear OPT model and going through, doing a review, because I think sometimes it's good for all of us to take a step back and make sure that when we're talking about integrated training and we're talking about stabilization, strength, and power, we're all still talking the same language. And sometimes this can get confusing, especially if you're new to NASM.
Yeah, when he also, travel in the country, I run into a lot of NASM, CPTs, and, ask about a superset or a phase of training. And sometimes they stumble and they're like, ooh. So, to me, it's like, this is something you want to always use. The model's always your best friend. The more and more you use it, the more and more you're going to memorize it and put it into your everyday practice. So, I think it's going to be good to review that. And I bet you there's going to be some people here like, you know what, I haven't really focused on that phase, or I forgot why that phase is where it's at too. So I think that hopefully we bring some light to why you and I just absolutely love the model and live and breathe by it daily.
Yeah. And I think too, just kind of a understanding of human movement science and the different types of progressions that we do and why. I think it's a good reminder. I mean, I know on the NASM Facebook page, actually just a few minutes ago, I was looking at it and there was a great comment that was made in there. It was someone that apparently is, has a lot of muscles. So I don't know if they're a bodybuilder or what the case is, but they were saying that now they're integrating and really focusing back on phase one, that all the people in the gym are like staring at them. And is that a bad thing or a good thing? And to me, I think it's a compliment, which is what I wrote. I'm like, good for you, because A, it's a great way to build business. B, it's something different and it starts a conversation. And so, oftentimes when people are like, I feel like when I'm using phase one or I'm doing this, that they feel awkward, and you shouldn't, because you're building a strong foundation, guys. You're only as strong as you are stable. And so, if you really want to work on strength and power, you need to be, very stable first, or you're only going to lead yourself to potential injury if you're not careful.
Like I always say, you can't fire a cannon from a canoe.
Very true. So that's actually what we're going to talk about. We're going to do a quick review about human movement system. We're going to talk about integrated training. We're going to talk about different periodizations and when you should go up, when you should go down, maybe talk about how Marty and I, when we're working with clients, if they've gone through all 5 phases, maybe how we would do some undulated training. So, again, the floor is open for you guys too, because we want to make sure if you have questions that we get those answered.
Excellent. And the key thing is, this has been studied and researched for 20 plus years now. And the research is always coming back that this is the best way to train. So, when we look at human movement system here, we've got to talk about the kinetic chain. Wendy loves her 5Ks, and the regional interdependence model. So, when you look at human movement, these are going to play very nicely together. So you'll see in the very center there, the HMS, or the human movement system. So you've got the nervous system that communicates to the muscular system to fire, and then that will move the skeletal system. Now, as fitness professionals, we're going to focus primarily on that nervous system and muscular system. As an athletic trainer, if there's physical therapists in here, Wendy has the manual therapy license. There's a time and a place that you may actually go focus on the skeletal system. But if you're doing your job, going through your assessments, doing the soft tissue work through self-myofascial techniques, following the right form and technique for our static stretching, moving into the active and dynamic stretching, by going after that nervous system and the quality of muscle recruitment and getting people to have their 5 kinetic chain checkpoints in order and activating the right muscles at the right time, a lot of times the skeletal system will do as it's designed or will improve its movement. Just on occasion, if you run into something where there's movement that is not improving like you think, one, do another reassessment. Make sure that your client is doing everything you've asked them to do, because sometimes they're like, kind of, maybe, yeah, I'm not really doing that, my homework. Or it's always good to have a referral system to where you can send somebody out to an athletic trainer, physical therapist, manual therapist like Wendy, because there is a time where if the skeletal system isn't moving well from a previous injury or some type of thing that they've had at birth, it can obviously affect the nervous system and the muscular system. But as a personal trainer, we're going to highly focus on that quality of the nervous system and muscular system to make the skeletal system work properly.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about the kinetic chain, again, we're looking at the foot and ankle complex. We're looking at the knees, making sure the knees and the hips are, in good alignment as well. So the ASIS bones and the knees and the ankles are all lined up. Hips are in neutral, shoulders are in neutral, and the head's in a good position. Guys, the reason why we're doing this is, like Marty said, we're trying to get all of our systems to work together. But, it starts with your brain. Your brain is the program. And we've used a computer as an example. It's the software. And over time, when we've had altered movement patterns and, based on how we're sitting or our job or these repetitive movements that are not healthy for our body, that becomes the new norm. And your body's always going to go to the path of least resistance. So when you're thinking along those terms, we need to reprogram the system, which is the brain. And then, so the nervous system, to be able to get different muscle recruitment, like Marty said, because, if we just allow those compensations to happen, we don't put people in proper alignment, we don't reactivate muscles that we know are underactive, and we don't calm those overactive muscles down, then we're doing a disservice to our clients. And so, it really is important to start from the beginning, start for the basics. It's not the sexy exercises, it's the exercises that should work. And even though oftentimes we get in our own head, it's not about what's hard for us, because we may be, fully going on all systems and everything's great and you move phenomenally. I am still not that in that category. I've got a lot of compensations I really work on and I have to focus on because of what I do. But, the thing is when that there's an underactive muscle based on that assessment, and that they're really struggling staying within the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints while they're moving, then don't think about what's easy or hard for you. Look at the form, look at the technique, slow tempos, get it firing correctly. So therefore, that you're doing good job in the program, so the body will follow suit.
Yeah. And before we move past this, I had a conversation with a high level fitness professional yesterday. He's got some young children at home, and we were talking about, think how beautifully infants move, right? From, once they start crawling and sitting and squatting, and, we all move really, really well at the beginning of our life. And then over time, due to a lot of different factors, we start moving poorly to different levels. So if somebody says, "Oh, I've always moved like this," probably not. It's just they can't remember when they haven't moved like that for a long period of time. And, I was walking through the airport yesterday, and I would see one foot turned out 30 degrees on one side, and somebody would have both feet turned out. And you start to see these. So these are correctable. We have to address them. And, I think that's what we're going to cover in bits and pieces today. But, why the model is so important.
Yeah. And when we, really think about this, it kind of brings us to this slide when we think about muscle imbalances. And I've always used the fist example. And if you guys have ever taken a workshop with me or been on other podcasts where I try to make this demonstration, if you can see it, it's obviously great to watch this. If you can't, listen to the words that I'm saying and try to focus on this. But you want to try to think, if you've got your wrist and elbow properly lined up, and you can make a fist, and your wrist is in neutral position, just like you're going to go punch someone, right? You're going to make sure that your joints are stacked. And that means each side of the joint is in proper alignment. You can make a pretty good fist. So if I go into wrist flexion and try to make that same fist, it's definitely weaker in comparison to when it was upright. And if I go into extension and do the same thing, it's extremely weak. And so, you'll hear people say, "Oh, if a muscle's overactive, it's over strong." Well, no, if you have an overactive muscle, it's putting the joint in a compromised position, and that muscle's still weak. If you go in the other direction, the joint is still in a compromised position, and it's even weaker. And so that's why when we talk about realignment, when we talk about muscle imbalances, we need to really focus on getting better length into the overactive muscle. So we do that by self-myofascial technique, percussion devices, anything that's going to get the muscles itself to relax. And then at that point, we need to strengthen the opposing side. So therefore, we have good stability back into that joint. this takes time. It's not like it's a one and done thing. And so that's why we tell everyone every 4 to 6 weeks reassess, because you're going to have to continuously work on it. It's not, oh, I did this one time, I foam rolled this and it didn't fix my problem. Well, it probably got better, but making sure that you really strengthen the opposite side, I think, is extremely important too, because you can't really just do one without the other.
Right. And I know Wendy likes to use violence in her descriptions where she's going to punch somebody, but it's a great description. But that's why the model is the model, right? There's nothing that's left out, whether it's the corrective exercise model or the OPT model. There's the sequences purposely, because the research has shown exactly what he's talking about, is that we have to identify overactive muscles that are causing the problem. Like, so if you look at the muscles and the picture on the right side of that, is one muscle's pulling, causing it. The other muscle is lengthened. You can use the term weakened as well in a relative sense, allowing that. So again, that's where the science has shown we are going to inhibit, we're going to lengthen the one side, we're going to activate and integrate the other side. And then you do that throughout the kinetic chain. And yes, this is a daily process. Wendy, you and I have talked about it before when we do live education, we show it. Nobody sleeps in good posture. So if you're spending 6 to 8 hours sleeping in poor posture, right out of the gate, you're going to have to work on things. Then most people have a commute. We're sitting right now. So it is something that we're going to have to work on every day. But, I'll use this example, and I know Wendy will pick on me in a second, but you floss your teeth, you brush your teeth every day for a reason, for maintenance, right? So this
or like
is where,
5 times a day if you're Marty Miller, by the way. So
hey, it is what it is. I could be known for worse things, right?
Yeah, I'm not. It's a good thing to do, Marty.
Right. Yes. Do I travel with the toothbrush in my bag? Yes. Do I have one in my back pocket at workshops? Yes. But don't judge me. But the point is, it's preventative maintenance, right? It's something. So yes, do I foam roll every day? Do I do my correctives every day? Do I work on my posture every day? Absolutely. Right. So as you said, it's not going to be a one and done, but it's that targeted warm up. So that way we can then go do the other phases of training that we want to spend time in.
Yes. So now this is one that I really like, this demonstration. And this one actually came out of the corrective exercise. So Marty and I are kind of pulling things from different places. And if you're just joining us today on the Master Instructor Roundtable, Marty Miller and myself, Wendy Batts, are talking about just integration, how human movement works, and why we utilize the model in the way that we do, and the rationale behind it. Again, we can talk about it, but if you don't have anything to say, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, then it's just a bunch of fluff. And that's definitely not what we want to, that's definitely not the direction that we're going. But, when you're looking basically at this diagram here, we're always talking about trying to have optimal neuromuscular control. And Marty said this on slide 1, we're trying to get the right muscles to fire at the right time in the right plane of motion. If we do that, because we move in all 3 planes of motion and our body has adapted to those movements and we're doing it correctly, we're minimizing the chances of having that joint go out of alignment. So then again, that's when we're talking about having issues. So when they're talking about arthrokinetomatics, meaning that the joints aren't really aligned because the muscles are having to use other muscles to get the job done. That's also when we're talking about link tension relationships. Guys, when we really focus on the regional interdependence model, if you're lacking 20 degrees of dorsiflexion or somewhere along even 15 to 20, that's what our target is. Anything less than that, we're going to start to have to use our synergists, which are those muscles that help the prime mover do the job. Well, then if those synergists are helping another muscle do something and they're not working on what they're supposed to be doing, then they're going to have to go all the way up the kinetic chain by borrowing a friend to get a job done. And so that's kind of the whole purpose of this model. We're trying to make sure that we don't have one side that's lengthened, one side that's overactive. We're trying to make sure that our joints are in proper alignment. When you look at everything together and we have perfect harmony, then this is going to lead to optimal human performance, because again, our 5 kinetic chain checkpoints are lined up. Our body's in good position. We're in the strongest position when our joints are lined up and stacked. And so therefore we're going to be able to lift more and then move faster without having to, borrow a friend, if you will.
Yeah. And Wendy, you and I have been doing this long enough, and before the Instagram, where, we used to bring a foam roller into a gym and people thought we were crazy. We used to do things on a single leg. We used to work on mobility. We started the corrective exercise teaching it. So the science was out there before. Back in 2005 was the first workshop. And now everybody's talking about mobility, and they might use a different term, but at least now I think you're going to get less pushback. I know in the industry, but even with your clients, mobility now has become cool, right? Working on these little ranges of motion has become cool. But don't just go on Instagram and find something and throw it in there. You've got to take that from an assessment standpoint, put it back in there where it belongs for that person. And now you're going to improve their human movement. So anything you see in that, I promise you, NASM was the one waving the flag back in the early 2000s talking about this. But now I think it's been widely accepted. And, Wendy, the day when, we used to talk about corrective exercise and that people thought we were nuts. It was just get stronger. That's how you prevent injuries. But people figured it out. Getting stronger on dysfunction is just stronger dysfunction.
Yes. Bad programming. And so, this is a question, Marty, I know you get a ton. I've gotten it in every single workshop. And that's one of the reasons for today. We're really talking about things that we discuss live, things that we do. And when you're thinking about integration, there's a certain approach to it. But the comments that we get is, how do you fit all this in? I don't know how to do all this in 45 minutes or an hour or whatever. And my question is why? Because I've done this for over 20 years. I'm able to integrate all the things that I need to in order to follow a systematic progress or a progression, even in that one particular workout. And so when you're thinking about having the assessment and knowing exactly what muscles you need to target, guys, if you look on the solutions table after you've done your overhead squat or your single leg squat, and you start to look at the common compensations that you're seeing, there is going to be certain muscles that you're going to see repetitively based on the compensations that you checked yes on. And so if you only have 45 minutes or an hour, then only foam roll 3 or 4 different, areas, maybe even just 3, but give them homework to do. Give them, a list. Hey, this is how I want you to foam roll. And I want you to take some initiative and do this on your own. So therefore, we're going to start to see progress faster. And this is going to make you feel better. They have to also want to own their journey, and you're there to be the provider, if you will. So foam rolling and then immediately going in static stretching, 3 different areas. And usually I would say, it's usually the foot and ankle complex. So we start to really focus on stretching and foam, or, foam rolling or so, the calves. Usually the TFL is a mess, or the hip flexors are a mess because people are in a seated position or have an anterior pelvic tilt. So I usually focus on another area of the hips. And then I usually see the lats. If their arms fall forward, if they have rounded shoulders, if they have any of those, the lats play a huge part in that, as well as the lower back arch that you're going to see. And so those would be the 3 ones that I would do. I wouldn't sit there and foam roll or stretch every single muscle that I knew needed it, because I do have a timeline and I need to be considerate of that. Plus, if you have a really good rapport and your clients are starting to understand what you want, have them come in 10 minutes before the time they meet with you and get that done. So as soon as they're done, they have lengthened those overactive areas that you wanted them to. So then when they start with you, you immediately go into activation, which is the core strength and stability. So those are your planks, your bridges, your, whatever it is that you need to target for the other side. And then, cardio, to me, I don't usually add cardio in like 5 or 10 minutes on a bike or a treadmill. They can do that on their own. So I do more of a vertical load for my weight loss clients. That's going to get their heart rate up. That is going to be cardio throughout their program. Slow tempos, one exercise right after another. So yeah, I don't take 10 minutes to do cardio because they're already going to be warmed up if they foam rolled correctly, if they've gone in and done static stretching. So I'll go from core. I do a balance, because remember, now that we've activated the other side, we've got to make sure that our joints know that when they're stacked, how to play with each other. And that's really where balance comes in. It's this awareness now in space of what your body's supposed to do, what the foot and ankle is supposed to do, what the arch of the foot is supposed to do. And so we really focus on balance on single leg, not on 2 legs standing on something, but can they keep their good center of gravity while they're doing a balance exercise? Then we do the plyometrics. We do that now because our body, we've activated something. We've got good stability within our joints. We speed it up, even though we may hold in phase 1, 3 to 5 seconds, to make sure we realign the body correctly. Again, reprogramming the brain. And then they do that two or 3 different times. And then I have them do the workout. Like I tell everyone, those things that we just did, that's your warm up. That is your warm up. So core, balance, and plyometrics is your warm up for now, what we're used to doing. And so do I do SAQ? I might, but I throw that into resistance. I may put them on speed ladder. They run through it, 5 or 7 different patterns. They immediately go into chest, back, bis, tris, shoulders, legs, and then we repeat. So it can be done. So just think about what you're doing, think about your whys, and then choose the correct exercises. And there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be able to get all of that done in one program.
Yeah, it absolutely can be done. And a couple of things that I thought about, Wendy, with your great explanation there is, first and foremost, you got to be your own first client. So if you're not training yourself that way, it may be harder for you to create a program within 30 to 45 minutes for that. Number two, Wendy, you talked about giving homework. If I have a client come in, if they're not there 10 minutes earlier and they don't get their foam rolling and stretching or whatever I have them doing, we start the program with that. And then eventually they're like, oh, okay, this is that important. I guess I'll get here a few minutes early. And same thing, I can teach somebody their cool down and don't have to watch them do it. But also, Wendy, you made a great point about the pattern of certain muscles being overactive. Well, guess what? There's going to be the flip side, muscles that are always underactive, right? Like Wendy, you and I have not ran into somebody that glute max is too strong yet, right? Or they're mid trap and low trap. So when you start to see these patterns, it's very easy to be very specific with your warm up and your muscles you're attacking from an overactive standpoint. And then if you start to integrate exercises that are mid trap, low trap with glutes, and then you get your balance in, you're going to be shocked. And when you start to get to those integration exercises, all of a sudden cardio can come in. And, so there's a lot of different ways to do it. As Wendy said, just train yourself this way. And then it only becomes easier to design programs for people.
Absolutely. It's a lot harder than it seems. But that kind of brings us into the 5 phases of the OPT model. Again, Marty said this, and we will say this until probably the day that we're no longer on this earth.
It'll be on my tombstone.
Right. Follow the OPT model, rest in peace. But, I think when we're really talking about the model, the reason why we're so passionate about it, and we haven't changed anything that we've ever said in over 20 years, is because it is evidence-based. It is rooted in science and research. It's not just something we read in a magazine and said, hey, this is cool, let's try it. It's not like, we're trying to sell something. I mean, I've had people in the industry say, why doesn't NASM change the model? And, because they'd be able to make more money if they change things. Well, it's not about making money. It's about doing what's right for the client and the trainer. So education-wise, yes, there's been some name changes because, for example, now we went back to muscular development. That muscular development was what it was when it first was originated. And then it started to become more confusing. So, the purpose of that is hypertrophy. So that ended up becoming the name for a while. And then it's like, well, it's really more than just hypertrophy. You're going to get a lot of things out of that. And it's not necessarily just size, it's strength. And so when you're thinking about using this model, again, it doesn't matter what the client's goal is. They could be coming straight from a physical therapist out of some surgery and got released, and now they need your help in moving better. So improved health, weight loss, of course, strength. They want to gain muscle. They need to, we work with the highest level athletes on the planet, and we've got to get them faster, stronger, and maybe even jumping higher, depending on whatever it is they're doing, or a faster club head speed or tennis, whatever it is. It doesn't matter the sport. The goal is still the same: movement quality, and then being able to build upon that. And again, it always starts with phase 1, having that good foundation, because think about if you don't have solid ground and you build a house on top of it, and then you have all these bells and whistles, you could have this unbelievable mansion. But if your foundation itself isn't stable and strong, it's going to break apart. And you did all of that for nothing.
I agree. And so for me, it's move well under load, move well at high speed, but it has to come back from moving well. And that's where, when I saw this the first time back in the early 2000s, it was that light bulb moment going, this is it. I've learned about all these other things. I knew about them all, but I didn't have that sequential process to put them in order. So, and I've been using it well over 20 years with myself and elite athletes to what I call the everyday athlete. And the results are phenomenal. You got to get in there, practice it, understand the concepts behind it, and you're going to see great results for yourself as well as your clients.
Yeah. I mean, even before NASM integrated before NASM actually adapted this methodology, they were saying they were missing a system. They were teaching people how to work out. They were teaching people body part exercises, but there was no foundation and reason for why. And when they met Dr. Clark, who was the creator of this OPT model, it was something that made sense. And so that's why it was put into NASM. It's always been a gold standard. We don't really, stray from it because there's no reason. But it's also important to say that the model is not rigid. It's not that this is the only way to do things. These are the only exercises that you can do in each phase. The exercises that you choose, as long as it's safe, as long as someone can be able to do it safely, effectively, and efficiently, and they're using the right rep range and the right tempo, that's a successful exercise. So even though you may do something that's not in the book, I mean, they can't put every single exercise in the book. You have to be creative as a trainer, but you also want to make sure too that you're not doing this standing on one leg, using a body blade, trying to do a crunch at the same time with rotation. That doesn't make sense. And what is that going to relate to in everyday activities? So be smart in your choices, but don't also just be very mundane and do the same thing over and over and over again. Be creative, have fun, and make it challenging for your clients.
No, I couldn't agree more with that, Wendy. So, that's where we love the model. And, here's another quick visual of what integrated training is, where we're looking at everything. So core is at the middle, of course, because all human movement should start at the core. We know from research that it may not if you have a low back injury. But, as you go around, everyone needs some level of flexibility. Even if the people that have ideal movement, they could still use active or dynamic stretching. Obviously, we know for people like myself and Wendy, you may be in this as well. There's times we need static stretching, but there's a purpose. We need balance. We need our cardiovascular system to be robust. You have to do resistance training. I like that it doesn't say weight training, right? Resistance training can still be, for some people, could be a plank, right? You are fighting resistance of your body, or push-ups. It doesn't have to have always external load. Speed, agility, quickness is excellent for everybody, whether you're an elite athlete or just looking to learn how to move through space and be coordinated. It's fun as well. And then plyometrics, if possible. They could be very, very low intensity all the way up to the highest intensity possible. So that is an integrated training model. And then, as we move through, we'll talk about how to undulate those programs either linearly or, in undulating periodization.
Mm-hmm. And this, guys, can be used again for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're youth. It doesn't matter if you're a senior. People are like, I don't know if I really want my seniors to do SAQ. Well, I'm going to tell you why, or ask you why, because seniors need to move. They need to learn to pick up their feet. Utilizing something like a speed ladder could be extremely beneficial for these individuals. Plus, it's fun. We think when people start to age that we have to be very, like sitting down on a machine. It's the only way because I don't have to worry about them falling. Well, first of all, if you train them utilizing the model and they are working on balance and they are working on stabilization, moving them through the model may not be as fast as they possibly can, but it may just be getting them to move in different directions, picking up their feet, going in the sagittal plane, frontal plane, transverse plane. It can be super beneficial. Plus, if you're working with youth, it can be extremely fun, but it's also going to help them in activities, especially in sport, that they're going to be doing either at that time or in the future.
And it's all relative, right? Speed to somebody may or may not be to somebody else, but as long as it's what they can control.
Exactly.
So I like this picture here because I do, again, think things are changing. But when we got into this industry, everybody wanted to work on the water line and above, where it's the power, the, explosiveness, all the cool stuff that people used to think was only cool. But we really need to work on what's below that water line, right? Proper movement, functional movement, stability, mobility. So that's where we've already talked about it. We don't need to go into too much depth, but the model's built off either corrective exercise and or stabilization endurance. That's what's below the water. That's holding the rest of the iceberg up. Then you get into the strength, endurance, potentially muscular development, max strength, and the power. And that's the athletic performance side. But you can't, as we say, you got to earn the right. You can't move at high speeds if you can't move slow and controlled. So, like if you visually show this to your clients or go through the steps of the model, I used to draw it out and nobody argued. If I said, okay, here's where we're going to start for the next 2 to 4 weeks, then we're going to go here, then we're going to go here. They're like, oh my God, you're blowing my mind. I didn't know that fitness was, I just thought we came in and did stuff. So earn the right to get above that athletic performance, the water line. And, but you got to build that foundation. You got to have that iceberg below the water to support what's sitting up above it.
And when people say, well, I want a 6-pack abs and I want this, it's important to say too, we need to train from the inside out. We need to train. People don't like phase one because we're really focusing more internally, intervertebral stability, trying to get, like you said, proper movement patterns, Marty, in our joints in better alignment so we can do the cool things that everyone wants to do and sees. But, just think you can crunch all day, but if you're really not stable, you're actually putting more, overactive, or overactive, you could be more overactive in your psoas, because your hips aren't in a good position. That attaches to every one of your lumbar spine. That's going to increase low back pain. So there is a purpose and a process. And so if somebody says, I've got low back pain, but I also want to look this way, then say, okay, we need to fix some of this. So therefore I can get you out of pain. Again, we're not dealing with quote pain. It's just their terminology of that. We're really thinking, trying to get the discomfort to lay off. And usually by just trying to get better alignment within certain regions of the body, that discomfort goes away. And so therefore miracle number one, their mind's blown, as you say, Marty. But then you can start to really hit the muscles that people can see. Plus, if you have them, moving constantly, they're doing vertical loads, they're going and they're watching their diet, they are going to start to see those muscles, quote, pop in relation to, if, them staying under the layers and layers of fat that they may have that we also need to deal with.
Right. And, for anyone that's just joining, myself, Marty Miller here with Wendy Batts on the Master Instructor Roundtable, we're doing kind of an NASM OPT review and talking about integrated training, kind of doing a reset on why the model has been the, success it has for 25 plus years, and why hopefully all of you have taken this and just getting you reset on, understanding the importance of the, exactly what we do with our movement assessments and then our very specific programming through the different phases. So as we move forward here, now we can talk about, how we want to progress, right? So when you look at intensity and duration, people are like, oh, I'm in the gym working, killing it for 2 hours. Define killing it, right? And I heard this the other day and I can't remember who said it, but if you're doing high intensity every day, you're not doing high intensity, right? So, there's the specific work to rest ratio. There's everything we have in the acute variables. And that's why we do what we do. So that's why this is a phenomenal linear model that you're going to start with lower weight, higher repetitions, longer time on attention. And then you're progressing through where eventually you get to power, where it's very explosive, higher intensity, but then you would need longer rest intervals. So it's all built in there for you. So when we look at a traditional method of program design, we're talking about aiming to gradually increase the intensity of the training load while simultaneously decreasing volume over that set period. So you can see here, we took this right from table 21-1. You can see the time frame here, week 1 to 4. Basically, the research shows it takes about 2 to 4, maybe 6 weeks for the body to adapt to a phase of training, depending on where you are. So weeks 1 to 4, stability and muscular endurance, light to moderate load. You'll see the percent of 1RM. Then weeks 5 to 8, we may go into hypertrophy, muscular development if it's a goal, and in strength. Moderate to heavy loads, you can see the 1RM moves up. So obviously the repetitions would go down. And then week 9 to 12, we're doing max strength into our power. So heavy to maximal loads, 85 to 100%. So again, this is where we need to be able to slide through this. And I'm going to pick on men. Most men stay in the muscular development phase, instead of 4 to 6 weeks, they do it for about 4 to 6 decades, right? That's all they do. And then they wonder why they get injured or don't see the results. So Wendy already talked about it. We don't need to review it. You can get goals in every phase from the previous phase, right? That's why they're stacked up that way. So don't think that if you just want muscular development and power, that's where you need to go. You need to earn that by going through all the previous phases.
Very well said. And when you look at these percentages, people are like, well, how do I know if I'm at this percentage? Guys, that's the importance of the acute variables. So when we talk about acute variables, again, that's just the sets, the reps, the tempo, the rest periods. Those are the acute variables. And when we say a slow tempo, it'd be really focusing more on the eccentric contraction. So, like a 4-2-1 in phase 1, in phase 2, when you're doing the stabilization, it may be a 3-2-1 because of the superset. The strength part may be 2-0-2. Well, how do I know this? It's all in the book. It's all in the book. But the reason why sometimes we put numbers to it is because, 1, 2, 3, 4, if somebody says count to 4 versus 1, 2, 3, 4. So tempo is going to play a huge role in it. And if you don't think that it really matters, try to do 12 to 15 push-ups, going down for 4 seconds, pausing at the bottom of that for 2 seconds, and coming up, adding the plus for 1, and doing that 12 to 15 times. You can see it's very difficult to do, and maintaining proper 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, making sure the head doesn't fall, the back doesn't arch. All of these things are really, really important. And when somebody can't do that, they haven't, as Marty says, earned the right to really go into doing something faster. I don't care how fast you can move if you can't move with the right muscles, because like we said, we're only going to increase compensation patterns if we don't nail it from the start.
Yeah. And if you don't know the weight, if you fatigue at the whatever reps, the percentage is already there. So don't worry. The percentage is a guide, but just if you're fatiguing at the reps for that particular phase, you're good to go.
Yeah. So if you say 12 to 20 and they could do 21 or 25, it's way too light.
Right.
Way too light. If you say 12 and they could barely get 6, but they're just pushing through it, it's way too heavy. That's where the percentages come in.
Right. And then, changing, we get this question all the time. What do I go through the model and keep going through the model? Yes, you can, right? Because stabilization the next time around could be more challenging. Strength endurance could be more challenging. Power could be more challenging. Or once you've gone through the model linearly the first time, then you can undulate. So you'll see, just as one example here, Monday, I might do muscular endurance. Wednesday, I could do power focused. And then Friday, maybe my hypertrophy, depending on the athlete, the sport, the goal of the client. And members or your clients will love this, instead of like, oh, we did this last time, right? Sometimes I go week by week. Week 1 could be stabilization endurance. Week 2 could be strength endurance. Week 3 could be power. As Wendy said, the model is very fluid. It's not rigid. You just have to understand the why. I've done it before where I warm up with stabilization endurance, then I do a set of strength endurance, and I finish with power. So there's ways that you can change things up, but there's always a scientific rationale behind it. So, I think this is an easy example of that undulating periodization, where day 1, I do one phase, day 2, that week, I do a different phase, and day 3, I do another phase. But be flexible with it, but just understand what you're doing and the why, and where you're putting what type of workout based on their activities, or if they're playing a sport, right? You may want them to be fully recovered. So that's where the rationale has to come in. And then maybe Tuesday, Thursdays, their speed, agility, quickness, or a cardio day, however you want to do it. But you can use the model both ways. We just highly, highly recommend, if you're going to undulate it, you should go through the model linearly the first time, so you've made the adaptations of each phase.
And I'm going to throw something in there too, because again, if you're like, let's say in phase 3, you graduated from phase 1, you did the supersets and all the things right in phase 2, and you're really trying to build hypertrophy, and it's 3 days a week. If you're not breaking it up into different body parts, sometimes, and you're doing total body every time you're in phase 3, or especially when you get to phase 4 and you're doing 1 to 5 repetitions, or 5 and it's power, then it's okay if you're in that one particular phase to throw in a phase 1 or phase 2, anywhere within that. So, for example, doing phase 5, 3 days in a row, that's really hard to do. And it's a lot to ask on your body. So we need to make sure that we are a fine moving machine each and every time. So maybe it's power on Monday, phase 1 to reestablish proper activation and patterning. So when I go into Friday, I can have that same power again. And so it's not that we have to just do 4 weeks only in that one phase. As you progress up, sprinkling in phase 1 and 2 is going to help you optimally get to the higher phases, and ensure that you're keeping the right muscles firing at the right time and the right plane of motion. So don't just think when Marty says linearly, yes, you can't just have a crummy day and you're only in phase 2 and throw a phase 5 in there just so you can throw stuff around. That is not going to be beneficial for anyone. And that could actually bring us down to phase 1 because they got injured. So it's one of those, if you're only in phase 2, then maybe undulate phases 1 and 2, phase 3, undulate 1 and 2 and 3, and so forth.
Yeah, sorry about that, Wendy. I thought you paused there for a second. So even what I'll do is, if I'm doing any of my phases, I will warm up with a few exercises of phase 1. And sometimes I will purposely do my last exercise or 2 back to phase 1 as a reset. When I'm fatigued, I'm picking an exercise that I can still control. I'm not picking the hardest version, but it really makes me lock in and finish off back into that stabilization endurance after I just fatigue myself with a strength endurance or a power workout, right? So again, that's where, as you're saying, Wendy, we can get creative with it. Very cool. It's so much fun. So Wendy, if you want to go through the key takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, guys, you can tell Marty and I love this. I mean, we teach this for 1 day, 2 day, every time like we present on it, and it's because it works. And that's one of the things. It doesn't matter what goal your client has, as long as you set realistic goals and realistic timelines. Any client can reach any goal safely, effectively, and efficiently, as long as you're programming correctly, you're reassessing, you're reevaluating goals, and you're choosing the right exercises for those individuals. So are you using the model? And if you are using the model, are you using the acute variables? Because the tempo is super, super important. So slow it down, speed it up, whatever it is based on the phase that you're in. But the model works. It's evidence-based. It's research. Quality is over quantity. If somebody's starting to break down, you have them going to 12 reps, they're on 10, they're falling apart. You shut it down right then. And then the next set, you're going to lower the weight and then try to get back to that optimal rep range again. So don't just do it to do it. Do it with intention, do it with quality, and maintain those 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. So therefore, you know you're going to do it correctly. And then don't be afraid to undulate your programming. When you've moved up past phase 1, that's when you start to go in and really start to integrate phase 2 actually has phase 1 in it. So usually I don't go back and forth in phase 2. But change up the exercises if you want. Be creative. It's not the same exercises all the time. That gets boring. But if somebody's new to these movements, it's okay to do them back to back until they start to understand what you're asking. And then you can become more creative, because usually those are the fundamental movement patterns that you need. So when you get to these more complex exercises throughout the model, the body's ready and prepared for that.
No, so very well said. And I think going back to understanding why NASM has created what they've created, why you went through this education, get back to the fundamentals, be your first client, be creative, and you will never, ever be bored with your training, you or your client.
Nope.
Excellent. Wendy, give all these amazing people your contact information.
I know we didn't have any questions. So if you guys do have any questions before we end the podcast, please feel free to enter them now so we can make sure we get those questions answered. But if you think about something later based on what we're saying, or you're listening to this after the fact, you can always email me at wendy.batts@nasm.org, or you can find me on Instagram at wendy.batts13.
And my information is coming right up. So same thing, feel free to reach out anytime. So dr.martymiller72, and then email marty.miller@nasm.org. And just as a last reminder, if you are NASM credentialed and you're not on the NASM CPT Facebook page, that's another great way to interact with a lot of people. This is where Wendy and I are both very active there, and this is where we get a lot of our ideas for the content. So feel free to jump in there and or reach out to us. So Wendy, great work as always. And since it doesn't look like there's any questions coming in yet, we'll wait for them to come to us individually. But for those of you that joined us today, we greatly appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Master Instructor Roundtable.